The bottle almost slipped. Orion caught it barely. His fingers locked around the neck of the wine just before it hit the edge of the table, and he stood there for half a second, chest tight, eyes down, breathing through his nose like the air itself might betray him. The restaurant hummed around him. Low light, crystal glasses, the kind of quiet that money buys, curated, controlled, suffocating. He was 7 months pregnant, running 4 hours into a double shift, and every bone in his lower back had decided tonight was the night to file a formal complaint. He ignored all of it. He had to. This job was the only thing standing between him and a situation he refused to think about while he was still on the clock. Table 9. VIP section. Last stop before he could disappear into the kitchen and sit down for 4 minutes. He moved toward it. Hi viewers. Have you ever had a moment where you walked into a room and felt, before you even looked up, that everything was about to change? Drop a yes or no in the comments right now. He adjusted the bottle, smoothed his apron with one hand, kept his eyes on the table, not the guest. That was the rule he had made for himself 8 weeks ago when he started here. Eyes down. Move fast. Don't linger. He reached the table, set the glass, began to pour, and then the man at the table shifted just slightly, and Orion's hand stopped moving. Not because he chose to stop, because his body made that decision without asking him first. The pour held midair, wine trembling at the lip of the bottle. One wrong breath away from disaster. Khyven Rourke looked up. Dark eyes, still face, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from calm. It comes from control so deep it has become the man's entire structure. Recognition didn't cross his face immediately. It flickered, just once. Like a light testing whether it still works. And in that single flicker, Orion's entire chest caved in. He straightened, finished the pour, set the bottle down with both hands because one wasn't going to hold it. He didn't speak, didn't greet, didn't do anything a server was supposed to do at a VIP table because every word he had ever learned had just packed up and left his body entirely. He turned to go. Look at me. 2 words. Low. Even. The kind of voice that doesn't ask. Orion stopped. His back was still to the table. His hand gripped the edge of the service tray. The restaurant kept moving around them. Glasses clinking, soft laughter, heels on marble. But right here, right at this single point in the room, everything had gone completely still. He already knew. Before he turned. Before he saw the expression on Khyven's face shift from flicker to certainty. He already knew that he had been recognized. Khyven did not move. He sat with both hands resting flat on the white tablecloth, his jaw set, his eyes tracking Orion the way a person tracks something they are not yet ready to reach for, watching first. Measuring. 3 years. That was the number. 3 years since Orion Vale had ceased to exist in his world. No call. No message. No forwarding address. Just an absence so complete it had eventually stopped feeling like a missing person and started feeling like a decision. He had convinced himself of that. The decision part. Looking at Orion now, that conviction cracked clean down the middle. Orion turned. Slowly. Like a man who had rehearsed this moment and found out in real time that rehearsals mean nothing. Khyven's eyes moved. Fast. Controlled. He caught everything in under 3 seconds. The exhaustion in Orion's face. The slight way he stood with his weight shifted, protecting something. The apron. The name badge that read only Orion. Not Vale. Not the full name. Just the first one. Like he had taken a pair of scissors to himself. I didn't get a name, Khyven said. His voice was even. Conversational. The tone he used in boardrooms when he already knew the answer and was simply waiting to see how someone delivered it. Orion blinked. It's on the badge. Your full name. A pause. Short. Heavy. Just Orion. Khyven held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he looked down at the menu he had no intention of reading. I'll have the lamb. Orion nodded once and walked away. Khyven watched him go. Specifically, he watched the way Orion moved. The careful steps. the hand that drifted, barely, to the side of his stomach when he turned a corner. A gesture so automatic the man probably didn't know he was doing it. Khyven knew what that gesture meant. He knew exactly what it meant. He had grown up watching his mother move the same way. That instinctive, unconscious reach toward the center of the body, like the hands already understood their new priority before the mind caught up. He set down the menu, picked up his phone, opened a blank document and typed 3 numbers. A gestational estimate. He was not a doctor, but he was a man who dealt in precision, and precision told him that the timeline placed the beginning of Orion's pregnancy at a point that coincided, exactly, with the last 3 months they had been together. His thumb hovered over the screen. He deleted the numbers. He didn't need them confirmed by math. He needed them confirmed by the man who was currently at the far end of the room. Pouring water for a table of 4 and keeping his back to Khyven like distance was a form of armor. Khyven waited until Orion returned with the food. Orion placed the plate. Khyven's fingers were near the edge of the table. When Orion reached across to adjust the placement, the back of Khyven's hand made the lightest contact. Unintentional, barely there. Orion flinched, hard, like the touch carried voltage. He pulled back, straightened. "I still down." Khyven said nothing, but when Orion finally moved to step away, Khyven said, quietly, the words nearly swallowed by the ambient room. "How far along?" Orion went still, completely still. He didn't answer. He didn't turn around either. He just stood there, tray against his side, the noise of the restaurant continuing around both of them like the world had no idea what was happening in this one small square of space. His silence stretched, and somewhere inside that silence, Khyven found the answer he had already calculated. He came back the next night. Same table, same time, same quiet request for the section that put him in Orion's line of service and nowhere else. Orion saw him the moment he stepped through the door. Khyven watched him see it. The way Orion's hand tightened around the order pad, the way his shoulders drew in slightly before he forced them back out and kept moving like nothing had registered. Khyven sat. He ordered water, then wine, then an appetizer he let go cold. He wasn't there for the food. He watched Orion work the floor. Not obviously, he was too disciplined for obvious. He kept his attention angled toward his phone or toward the middle distance, the way people do when they appear to be thinking. But his peripheral vision was doing all the real work, cataloging, building. Orion skipped the staff meal. Khyven clocked it when the other servers rotated through the back during the brief kitchen window. Orion stayed on the floor, running himself past the point of common sense. He watched Orion brace one hand on the edge of a station counter when he thought no one was looking. Just a second, just enough to breathe through something, and then push off again and keep moving. The third night, Khyven made a quiet request to the floor manager. He wanted a specific dish sent to table 11. He described it with enough detail that the manager didn't question the order. He only added one instruction. It was not to be identified as coming from him. Orion delivered it himself, which was the point. He set it down at the table, looked at the guest who hadn't ordered it, looked at the ticket, frowned, asked the floor manager, got a shrug and a VIP instruction. Just set it down. He set it down. The guest didn't touch it, because there was no guest. Khyven had reserved the table empty. At the end of the shift, Orion was collecting the section when he found it. Full plate, untouched, still warm under the cover. He stood there for a long moment, looked at it, looked around the empty section. Khyven was already gone, but the plate was still there. And Orion was smart enough, had always been smart enough, to understand that the food was never meant for the table. He stood in the dim, cleared-out section, hand resting low on his stomach, staring at a meal someone had ordered for him without saying so. His jaw tightened. Not gratitude, fear. Because if Khyven was watching closely enough to notice he wasn't eating, that meant Khyven had been watching for longer than just tonight. And the question wasn't what Khyven knew. The question was what he planned to do with it. It happened fast. 1 minute Orion was moving through the main floor, working his way back toward the service station, and then a hand landed on his wrist. Hard. A man at table 6, 3 drinks deep, voice too loud for the room, apparently decided that the server hadn't been attentive enough and chose to make his point through grip. Orion froze. Not from pain, though the grip was tight enough. He froze the way a person freezes when the body remembers something the mind has spent months trying to file away. Shoulders in, chin down. The specific stillness of someone who has learned that reacting makes things worse. He didn't pull back. He didn't speak. He just waited. He didn't have to wait long. There was no raised voice, no scene, no dramatic interruption. Just a shift in the room, the kind of shift that happens when someone with a specific kind of authority moves with purpose. And then 2 members of the restaurant's private security staff appeared at table 6, and the man's grip was gone, and the man was gone, and the table was empty in under 90 seconds. Orion stood there, wrist free, tray still in hand. He turned. Khyven was 3 feet away. He hadn't been 3 feet away 60 seconds ago. Orion was certain of that. But he was there now, standing just inside the edge of the cleared space, hands in his pockets, expression completely neutral. Too close. The distance between them was the kind that exists between people who know each other. Not strangers. Not colleagues. Something older. Orion's breathing shifted without permission. He took a step back. Khyven didn't follow, but he didn't step away either. He held his position like he had every right to occupy it. "I'm fine," Orion said. First words he had spoken directly to him in 3 nights. "I know," Khyven said. No concern in his voice. No warmth. Just fact, delivered flat like he was confirming something he had already handled. And that was the part that unsettled Orion most. Not the speed. Not the removal. Not even the fact that Khyven had clearly arranged security access in a building he didn't own, at least not publicly. It was the calm. The complete, undisturbed calm of a man who had anticipated this. Which meant he had been thinking about Orion's safety before the incident happened. Which meant he had already decided something. Orion's grip tightened on the tray. "You didn't have to do that." Khyven looked at him. Just looked. The way people look when they are choosing which version of the truth to deliver. Then quietly, "No one touches you like that again." It landed wrong. It should have been reassurance. It was framed like reassurance. But the texture of it, the weight underneath, felt nothing like protection. Felt like a boundary being drawn. Not around Orion's safety. Around Orion. He stood in the middle of the restaurant floor, surrounded by the low hum of dinner service and the distant sound of glass and conversation, and understood clearly, for the first time since that first night, Khyven wasn't watching him out of guilt. He wasn't watching him out of confusion or nostalgia or unfinished grief. He was watching him because he had already made a decision, and Orion hadn't been consulted. His vision went gray at the edges first. Then his knees decided they were done. It happened mid-stride, no warning, no slow build. Just the floor tilting slightly and the tray in his hand suddenly weighing 40 pounds and his body announcing, without any interest in his schedule, that it had reached its limit for the evening. He went down. He didn't hit the floor. An arm caught him, one arm around his back, the other hand coming up under his elbow, and the grip was firm enough that he felt it before he processed who it belonged to. He knew before he looked up. The scent hit him first. Not cologne. Deeper than that. The kind of scent that lives in memory because the body stores it without being asked. Familiar in the way a childhood home is familiar. Not because you chose it, but because it was everywhere during a time that shaped you. He looked up. Khyven. Of course it was Khyven. Because apparently this night had decided that humiliation wasn't enough and wanted to add something worse. Orion started. Don't. Khyven's voice was low. Not harsh. Just final. He didn't let go. Orion tried to straighten. Khyven adjusted his grip to make room for it but didn't release him, and for 3 full seconds they stood like that. Orion half upright, Khyven's arm still across his back, the restaurant continuing to exist around them as though nothing significant was happening in this single square of floor. Something shifted. Not in the room. In Orion. Because standing this close, held this way, the body didn't lie. The suppressants he took every morning did their job most of the time. They kept the pheromones down, kept the biological signals quiet, kept him unreadable to anyone passing through a crowd. But this wasn't a crowd. This was 12 inches. This was 3 years of missing someone folded into a moment his body hadn't consented to forgetting. He felt Khyven go still. Completely still. The kind of still that happens when someone stops performing composure and actually needs it. He had caught the scent. Not the surface layer. The one underneath, the one the suppressants couldn't fully erase. The one that carried information the body broadcasts without asking permission. Orion watched Khyven's jaw tighten. He tried to pull back again. This time Khyven let him. But he didn't move far. Just enough to look at him directly, one hand still at his elbow, eyes reading his face the way people read something they are trying to memorize. Private room, Khyven said. Not a question. Not a suggestion. A decision that had already been made. I don't need. You almost hit the floor. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You're coming off the floor. Now. Orion looked around. The floor manager was watching from the service station, not with concern for him, but with the specific nervousness of someone watching a VIP guest interact with their staff in an unplanned way. He had no leverage here. He knew that. He walked. Khyven followed or led, it was hard to say which because somehow he was 2 steps ahead and 2 steps behind at the same time, the way certain people move through spaces like the space already belongs to them. The private room was small and quiet. Low light. A corner booth the restaurant kept for guests who needed discretion. The door closed. The ambient noise of the restaurant became a murmur. Then almost nothing. Orion sat because his back needed a surface to argue with. He kept his hands on the table. Eyes forward. Breathing slow. Khyven didn't sit immediately. He stood across from him. Looking. That look again. The one that catalogued everything, the one that missed nothing, the one Orion had spent 3 years trying to forget the weight of. Then Khyven pulled out the chair across from him. Saturday. Leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, fingers laced together. And the question, when it came, was quiet. Not accusatory. Not cold. Just direct, the way a wound is direct. Why didn't you tell me? Orion stared at the table. The question sat in the air between them like something that had been waiting 3 years to be said out loud. And the answer, the real answer, was going to cost him something. He could feel it. Because the real answer didn't start with him. It started with people Khyven trusted. And that was the part that was going to change everything. Sometimes the past doesn't come back loudly. Sometimes it just stands in front of you and waits. Comment below. If you were Orion, would you tell Khyven the truth right now? Or walk out of that room? Be honest. Drop it in the comments. He laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because sometimes the body doesn't know what else to do when the truth has been sitting in a locked room for 3 years and someone finally opens the door. Orion laughed. Short, sharp, broken at the edges, and then pressed the back of his hand to his mouth and stopped. Khyven hadn't moved. He was still across the table. Still watching. Hands still folded together like he was in a meeting and not in a private room with the person he had spent 3 years believing had walked away from him by choice. Orion lowered his hand. You want to know why I didn't tell you? Not a question. A repetition. Testing the shape of it in his own mouth. I tried. Khyven didn't respond. 3 times. Orion's voice was flat. Controlled in the way that things are controlled right before they aren't. First time, your assistant told me you were in a closed quarter review and couldn't be interrupted. She took my number. Nobody called back. He paused. Second time, I made it to your floor. Building security stopped me at the elevator. Said I wasn't on the cleared list anymore. Said my access had been removed. Khyven's jaw shifted slightly. Orion caught it. He kept going. Third time, I sent a letter. Physical. addressed directly to you, with documentation. His eyes dropped to the table. 2 days later, a man came to my apartment. He wasn't rude. He wasn't loud. He just told me, calmly, that continuing to contact you would constitute harassment. That my claim had no legal standing. That if I persisted, the company had grounds to pursue action. Silence. The room held it like a container. He left a number. Told me to call it if I needed support for. Orion stopped. His hand moved to his stomach. A gesture he didn't plan. For the situation. Khyven still hadn't spoken. That was the part Orion hadn't been prepared for. He had braced for anger. Denial. The particular coldness of a man who has decided his version of events is the correct one. He had replayed this confrontation in his head so many times. Lying awake at 3 in the morning with his back aching and his chest tight, and in every version Khyven argued. He wasn't arguing. He was listening. Completely. The kind of listening that doesn't interrupt because it's already doing something else underneath the surface. Filing, cross-referencing, building. I left, Orion said. Not because I wanted to. Because staying felt like a door that had been locked from the other side. And I had someone else to think about. His voice steadied on that last sentence. That one didn't break. So I left. Khyven unfolded his hands. He placed them flat on the table. Slowly, deliberately, and looked at them for a moment. Then he looked at Orion. Who came to your apartment? Orion blinked. Of everything he might have said, that was the question. I don't know his name. He didn't give one. What did he look like? Orion described him. Age, height, the specific gray of his suit. The company lanyard he hadn't bothered to hide. Khyven went very quiet. Not the quiet of someone processing. The quiet of someone who has just confirmed something they suspected and are now calculating exactly what to do about it. He stood. No warning. No preamble. Just up, the chair sliding back smooth and controlled. Wait here, he said. Orion frowned. I have a shift. It's handled. And then he was at the door. And for a single second before he stepped out, he turned back. His face held something Orion had never seen on it before. Not anger. Not hurt. Uncertainty. There and gone in less than 2 seconds. Then the door closed. And Orion sat in the silence of a private room and realized, for the first time in 3 years, that the wall he had built the entire story against might have been standing on the wrong foundation. By morning, 3 things had happened. Khyven had not slept. His legal team had received an emergency briefing at 6 a.m. And a man named Dorian Ashby, Senior Vice President of External Affairs at Rourke Capital, had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending internal review. None of this was public. None of it made noise. That was intentional. Khyven worked the way a surgeon works. Not fast, not emotional, just precise. He sat at the long table in his private office on the 42nd floor and went through every document his team had pulled in the 12 hours since he left the restaurant. Communications logs. Security access records. The visitor clearance list from the week Orion had come to the building. There. His name had been on the list. Then it wasn't. Removed. Manually. By an account with executive credentials that traced back through 2 layers of administrative cover and landed cleanly on Dorian Ashby. Khyven set down the report. Picked up his coffee. It had gone cold an hour ago. He drank it anyway. He kept reading. The letter Orion had sent. Physical mail, addressed directly to his office. Had been logged in the building's mail system at 11:42 on a Thursday morning. Standard processing time would have placed it on his desk by end of day. It never appeared. Intercepted. Redirected. Marked in the internal system as unsolicited correspondence from an unverified party. Filed. Not shredded, that would have left a gap. Filed. In a subfolder inside a subfolder, 3 directories deep in the legal department's external communications archive, labeled with a case number that didn't connect to any active file. Deliberate. Not a mistake. Not an oversight. A decision someone made and then buried under enough paperwork to survive a standard audit. Khyven turned a page. The man who had gone to Orion's apartment, the one Orion had described, matched the physical description of a contracted security consultant the company had used for 6 months around that period. His contract had been arranged through Ashby's department, paid from a discretionary line item. The reason listed in the budget: external stakeholder management. Khyven read that phrase twice. He set the report down. Outside, the city moved below him, 42 floors of distance between him and the street, and still the weight of what he was reading felt immediate. Close. Personal in a way that corporate documents rarely were. Orion had tried to reach him 3 times. And 3 times, something with his company's resources and his company's access and his company's money had made sure the message never arrived. Because a pregnant Omega with a connection to the Alpha at the top of Rourke Capital created complications. Leverage concerns. Public narrative risk. That's what the internal memo called it. Pulled from Ashby's encrypted drive by the IT team at 5:47 that morning. Narrative risk. Khyven's hand rested flat on the desk. He was not a man who shouted. He was not a man who broke things. He was a man who identified what needed to be removed and removed it. Thoroughly, quietly, and in a way that could not be undone. He picked up his phone. Made 2 calls. The first was to his chief of staff. The second was to his attorney. By the time the sun was fully up, Dorian Ashby's security credentials had been deactivated, his office sealed, and a forensic accounting review had been initiated on every discretionary expenditure his department had processed in the last 4 years. 3 other names had surfaced in the documents. 3 people who had known, or who had seen enough to ask questions and had chosen not to. They would each receive a meeting request before noon. Khyven opened a new document on his screen. He typed a name, then a second name, then stopped. Because the third name, the one that had just come up in the most recent file his team had flagged, was someone he had trusted entirely. Someone who had been in the room when he had said, 6 months after Orion disappeared, that he needed to understand what had happened. Someone who had looked him in the eye and said, "Some people just leave." Khyven stared at the name on the screen. The coffee sat cold beside him. The city moved below. And in the careful, controlled silence of a room where decisions happened, he understood, completely and without any remaining doubt, that the betrayal had been closer than he had ever thought to look. Orion found out on a Wednesday, not from Khyven, from Dessa, the floor manager at the restaurant, who pulled him aside before his shift with a look on her face that sat somewhere between confused and carefully neutral. "Your schedule's been adjusted," she said. Orion stared at her. "By who?" "Management. Dessa." She pressed her lips together. "The VIP account that's been booking table 9. They made a formal request. Lighter rotation for you. No doubles. No closing shifts." A pause. The request came with compensation for the coverage hours. Orion felt the cold land in his chest like something dropped from a height. "I didn't ask for that." "I know. Tell them no." Dessa looked at him, carefully, like she was choosing words out of a box and needed to pick the right ones. It's significant. Operationally, we can't." "Tell them no," Orion said again, quietly, without heat, just clear. He walked onto the floor. He worked his full rotation. His back screamed for the last 2 hours. He did not leave early. When Khyven arrived that evening and found him running a full section, something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, just a slight adjustment around the eyes, the look of someone whose plan encountered friction. He sat. He waited until the floor thinned out. Then, when Orion passed close enough, he said, "You're going to exhaust yourself." "That's my business," Orion said without stopping. "Orion." He stopped. Not because the tone was commanding, because it wasn't. It was something else. Something without edges. And that was harder to walk away from than authority ever was. He turned slowly. Khyven was looking at him with the specific focus of someone who has recently learned something that rearranged their entire understanding of a situation, and has not yet decided how to carry the new weight of it. I'm not trying to control your schedule, Khyven said. Then what are you doing? A beat. Trying to make sure you don't collapse again. One time, Orion said. That happened one time. This week. Orion's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight. His lower back made its usual complaints. I don't need you managing things around me, he said. I don't need the schedule changes or the food at empty tables or the... He stopped. Breathed. I spent 3 years figuring out how to do this without any of that. I know how to function. Khyven said nothing for a moment. Then, I know you do. Orion hadn't expected that. He had expected pushback. Justification. The particular arrogance of someone who has decided that help, when given by the right person, cancels out the need for consent. Not this. You did what you had to do, Khyven said. Even. Direct. I'm not going to stand here and act like that doesn't mean anything. His eyes held steady. But what was done to keep you from reaching me? That wasn't you carrying it alone by choice. Orion felt something shift in his chest. He pressed it back down. What does that change? He asked. His voice came out steadier than he expected. Khyven stepped closer. Not much. Just enough. You think this is about control, he said. Lo, you think I'm rearranging things because that's what I do. Manage and position and move people where I need them. Orion didn't answer. You haven't seen control, Khyven said. What you've seen is the edges of something else. And what's that? A long pause. The restaurant breathed around them. Quiet, almost empty, the last of the dinner hour fading. Khyven looked at him. You'll figure it out, he said, and walked back to his table. Orion stood in the middle of the floor, weight in his heels, hand drifting, without thinking, to his stomach. The thing he had pressed down in his chest refused to stay pressed. He heard it from a former colleague. Not the full story, just fragments. The kind that float up when something large and quiet has been dismantled behind closed doors and the people on the edges of it start talking in lowered voices because they don't understand what they witnessed. 3 executives. Gone. 1 VP removed without announcement. An internal audit that nobody had been officially informed about, but that somehow everyone seemed to know had happened. Orion was sitting in the break room on his lunch when Tatum, a server who had worked the restaurant for 4 years, leaned across the table and said, You hear anything about the Rourke account? Orion kept his eyes on his food. No. Word is there was some kind of internal shakeup. People got removed. Tatum shrugged. Someone said it had to do with documents, old communications, something that got buried. Orion set his fork down. He didn't look up immediately. He sat with it for a few seconds. The specific weight of hearing something that rearranges what you thought was settled. When did this happen? He asked. Past few weeks, I think. It's quiet. Like the kind of quiet where things are actually happening, you know? Not the kind where nothing is. He knew exactly that kind of quiet. He sat alone in the break room after Tatum left and looked at the wall. 3 years. He had spent 3 years building the story of what had happened around a single solid belief. That Khyven had let him disappear. That somewhere inside the machine of that empire someone had made a calculation, and the calculation had concluded that Orion wasn't worth the disruption. He had built an entire life around that belief. Every decision, every mile of distance, every night lying awake listening to his own heartbeat and the smaller, newer heartbeat that had started making itself known around month 5. Every one of those nights had been built on the foundation of, he chose not to find me, but he hadn't chosen. He had been cut off. And now, quietly, without press releases, without public accountability, the people who had done the cutting were being removed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just gone. Like a problem identified and handled by someone who dealt in precision and had no interest in making it a performance. Orion pressed his thumb against the table's edge and thought about what that meant. Not abstractly, concretely. Khyven had found out, had gone looking specifically, deliberately, and had found evidence that Orion had never been the one who walked away. And Khyven's response had not been a conversation. It had been a dismantling. That mattered. He didn't know yet what to do with it, whether to let it in, whether it changed the last 3 years of choices, whether it closed any of the distance or just explained it. But it mattered. He was still sitting there when his break ended. He stood slowly, pressed his hand to his lower back, walked back out onto the floor, and when he rounded the corner toward the main section and saw Khyven already seated at table 9, earlier than usual, jacket on, no phone in hand, just sitting, the look on Khyven's face when their eyes met wasn't the careful, controlled study of the last several weeks. It was direct. No calculation behind it. Just direct. Like the performance of distance had finally run out of material. Orion stopped walking. For a moment, neither of them moved. The restaurant existed around them. Servers, guests, the low hum of an ordinary Wednesday evening, and none of it touched whatever was happening in the space between the door and table 9. Khyven stood. He didn't call across the room. He didn't gesture. He just stood, slowly, with the full weight of someone who has finished doing things indirectly and has arrived at the part where indirection no longer serves. And Orion understood, without a word being spoken, that this was different from every other night. This wasn't a man watching from a distance. This was a man who had finished preparing for a conversation he had no intention of avoiding anymore. Orion spoke first. He hadn't planned to, but the silence had a pressure to it, the kind that builds until someone either leaves or breaks it, and leaving didn't feel like an option anymore. Why are you doing all of this now? The question came out quieter than he intended. They were in the same private room. Same low light. Same corner booth. Different weight in the air, heavier now, more specific, like the room itself understood this conversation was not the same as the last one. Khyven was standing. He hadn't sat yet. He looked at Orion across the small space, not with the careful, measuring study of the past several weeks. Without the performance of restraint. Just directly. The way a person looks when they have stopped managing how they look. You think this is about fixing what happened? Khyven said. Not a question. Correction. Orion held his gaze. Isn't it? Khyven moved. One step. Then another. Slow. Not rushed. The way someone moves when they are certain about their direction and have no reason to hurry. He stopped close. Closer than the table between them should have allowed. But he was around it now, the geometry of the room rearranged without Orion noticing the transition. I found out what they did, Khyven said. I removed them. I traced every document, every blocked channel, every decision that was made to keep you unreachable. A pause. That's done. I know, Orion said. His voice stayed even. I heard. Khyven looked at him. And Orion shifted his weight. His hand moved, without thought, without permission, and rested low against his stomach. He caught himself doing it and didn't move it back. And I don't know what you want from me, he said. I don't know if this is guilt, or strategy, or something else I haven't named yet. It's not guilt. Then what is it? Khyven was close enough now that the question didn't need to carry any distance at all. He didn't answer immediately. He let the silence do what silence does when it's used correctly, not to avoid, but to carry weight. 3 years ago, he said, someone made a decision about what I was allowed to know, about what was a liability and what was mine. His jaw was set. His voice was low and entirely level. They made that decision for me, without asking. Without. He stopped. His eyes moved, briefly, to where Orion's hand still rested, then back up. Without understanding what they were actually taking. Orion didn't speak. I'm not here because I owe you an explanation, Khyven continued. I'm not here to apologize for something I didn't know was happening. I'm here because when I found out what was done, a pause, short, waited. I understood that the people who did it had made one very specific mistake. What mistake? They thought they were protecting business interests. His eyes held steady on Orion's. They didn't understand that you were the interest. The room went completely quiet. Orion felt the words land. Not gently, not softly, directly. In the center of something he had been keeping very carefully locked. He looked at Khyven, really looked, the way you look at something you've been keeping at the edge of your vision because looking directly at it costs something. I built a whole life, Orion said. Quiet. A whole separate life. On the belief that you had decided I wasn't worth the disruption. I know. That belief, he stopped. Started again. That belief was the foundation of every decision I made for 3 years. Everything I chose. Everything I didn't. Khyven didn't look away. I know that too. Silence. Heavy. But not crushing. The kind of silence that is the pause between one thing ending and another beginning. The breath before the next line. The space before the structure shifts. Orion exhaled. His hand pressed slightly against his stomach. A habit now, automatic, the way all the most honest things become. So what happens now? He asked. Khyven stepped closer. One last step. The kind of closeness that makes the question rhetorical. You still think this is about the past, he said. Low. Final. He let the pause breathe. It's not. He held Orion's gaze. Steady. Certain. The full weight of a man who has spent the last several weeks dismantling everything that stood between this moment and this room. It's about making sure no one takes what's mine again. Orion didn't move. He stood in the low light of that quiet room, with 3 years of distance behind him and an uncertain road ahead, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could pinpoint, something open in his chest where there had only been armor. Not trust. Not yet. But the first crack in the wall through which trust, eventually, travels. And the child between them. The one Orion had carried alone through every closed door and every silent phone and every night that felt like it had no ending. Moved. Just once. A small, private shift beneath his hand. Like the smallest possible acknowledgement that something somewhere had just changed. Some people don't go back to what they lost. They rebuild it on their own terms. And the most dangerous kind of love isn't the kind that shouts. It's the kind that quietly removes every obstacle. And then waits. This story is done. But the journey doesn't end here. If this moved you, if you felt every shift in that room, if you found yourself choosing sides in the comments, then you already know this channel is where real stories live. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the next story coming to this channel carries the same heat, the same stakes, and the same emotional weight that made you stay until the final line. You don't want to miss it. And if this story made you feel something, drop it in the comments. Your words don't just reach me. They reach every person who needed to hear that someone else felt exactly the same thing. Share this. Pass it on. You never know who needs a story like this today.